Commandments all the time, I'm sure we'd have Zion already. So a little backstory. We all know Moses led his people out of Israel, out of bondage of Egypt. Um, and I went back and I just read that section. Apparently they were only in the wilderness for 3 months when they came upon Mount Sinai. And that's where where God spoke to Moses. And one of the many things he spoke to him was the 10 Commandments. All right, so who can name the 10 Commandments? Well, I can. We all name them? All right. Ben, give me 2 of them. Wait for the mic.
Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images.
All right. Who wants to give me 2 more? Thomas.
Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain, and honor the Sabbath day and keep it holy.
All right. Who wants to give me?
6 days thou shalt labor and work therein.
All right. Who wants to give me 2 more? Emma.
Honor thy father and mother, and thou shalt not kill.
All right. So is that 6? We got 6. Who wants to give me 2 more? Bessie?
Thou shalt not commit adultery, and thou shalt not steal.
All right. Last 2. Finish this off. Bonnie, because she's been patiently waiting.
Thou shalt not bear false witness against your neighbor, and thou shalt not covet anything that is your neighbor's.
All right. Cool. So we got that down. 10 Commandments. Right there. Boom. Just in case we missed any, but we got them all. This is something we should be teaching our children. And Thoric, Aiden and Owen know them, right? Yeah. Yeah. But just knowing them doesn't really help us. Just by knowing what it means, that doesn't really help because we have to actively implement them. Yep, look at that, 10 sentences. Doesn't seem all that hard, but why do we struggle to keep them? What are reasons you think people struggle to keep the commandments?
Because man is carnal, sensual, and devilish, and an enemy to God.
All right, that's Holly.
Sometimes it's your relationship with other people, being more concerned about that than your relationship with God. Or also greed would be another issue.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it is harder to keep 10 things in your mind all going at one time, Oh, wait, this. All right, okay, I could do it. If you try to follow the 10 Commandments. But what is the greatest commandment? Thomas.
Love the Lord God with all your heart, and love your neighbor as yourself.
Wow, look at that. A lawyer asked Jesus, what is the greatest commandment? Jesus plainly stated that thou shalt love thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. So this is the first and great commandment. And the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and all the prophets. Right? So, boom. Jesus boiled down 10 commandments into 2. Now all we have to do is love God with all our heart. So, how do we love God with all our heart, mind, and soul? How can we do that? Holly?
I would say it would be by service.
By
Even though it
service.
says, if you love me, keep my commandments. But some of them are like, thou shalt not kill. I mean, most of us don't have a real issue with that. And some of them are pretty, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, those kind of things. there's a lot of that what you should not do in there. Um, but I think that the way that you really show God you love Him, other than just keeping those commandments and the other ones that are in the scriptures, is by service. That's how you really do that.
Bobby?
Like Holly said, center your life around service to God, and don't seek after things that are like gold and silver and all that stuff that most people are trying to find a big house, car, riches, all that kind of thing. But if you do seek after God, He will provide the things needful to you as you go through life. You'll find that to be true. But the first thing we need to do is to witness. And if we witness, that means we don't want to be hypocrites. So we have to keep ourselves under discipline and control, self-control. And that's how we can learn to love God, because through that, when you love God, it's not a laborious thing anymore to follow Him. You start to abhor those things that take you away from Him, and evaluate whether they're dead works or whether they have some value.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I try to keep in my mind. I think my next slide talks about it. Okay. Well, no, it doesn't. It talks about it later in one of my slides. One of the things I try to do is what I'm doing, am I putting all of my love to the Lord and what I'm doing? And then I ask myself, am I loving my neighbor through those actions? And I love myself a lot, so I try to do a lot of things that help me. And if I'm supposed to love all of my neighbors, which is basically everyone, as I would love myself, I should then be trying to strive to do everything in my power that I can for them. And that's where I think service comes into, is by loving your neighbor, you're serving them. Desi, and then Emma.
Jesus said that as much as you do this to one of the least of these, you've done it unto me. So it would be service to others.
Exactly. So the commandments, we are commanded, I would say, by loving our neighbor as ourselves. We are commanded to serve our neighbors. Emma?
So I think it's interesting that it says, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. Because your heart is like, the way I'm looking at it, I think your heart is like your emotions. And then with your soul, we've talked about before in other classes that your soul is like your body and your spirit together. And then, so there's your body, your physical self. And then with all thy mind is like your logic, so like that really covers everything you own out of those three things. And all of that is also, God gave us all agency, and we get to choose what we do with those things. And so the commandment is that we use our agency to love God and to serve Him and to do what He wants. And that covers everything in our lives.
Pretty good. All right. So Bonnie said, why are these commandments so simple? Or if these commandments are so simple, why is it hard to follow them? And Bonnie said pretty good earlier, it's because we are carnal in nature. It's easier for us to think about ourselves because we are ourselves. Out of sight, out of mind, if you don't think about God all the time, then, it's harder for us to think about His laws, His commandments and whatnot. Holly, you had your hand up?
I think that for most of us, the 10 Commandments aren't the commandments that are hardest to follow. I think it's the other commandments that are harder to follow. the ones that are more specific. Because, I mean, if you think through the Ten Commandments, you know, no other gods before me, I guess you could say there could be an issue with that, but I don't think most of the time there is, unless you consider what that means in specifics and all. We don't have idols, you know, hopefully we don't, oh, well, I meant, yeah, but I don't think we put that before God. At least here, I don't know. Maybe I just think highly of our branch. I don't know. I think highly of our branch, maybe. I mean, we don't say bad words. Probably keeping the Sabbath day would be something that's more difficult. But there's so many specific little details in the scriptures that seem harder to me to keep. And there's hundreds and hundreds of commandments if you think about it in the scriptures. So, I don't know, just a comment.
I mean, I know the Ten Commandments are very broad, and even if you boil it down to the two greatest commandments, Jesus said that's very broad. But if you could try to apply those to every situation you're in, then I find that it all boils down to those two. Bonnie?
Well, the world is diametrically opposed to God's laws. For instance, love your enemies. People think you're crazy if you would do that. Do good to those who persecute you, and pray for them and all. And that's a hard one to follow sometimes. It's also forgiving. Forgiving over and over and over again is a hard one to follow, because our nature is against that, and that's why it's so important to keep ourselves under control. If we want to be in God's kingdom, we have to know his rules and we have to follow them. So if we don't want to be in his kingdom, then we follow the broad road that says punch the guy in the nose, do something bad to him, you know, and all these other things that we don't think about, like go the extra mile. In other words, you have a job, you've been given a job, go the extra mile and do it really well. And those things, they just, you know, the world says just get it done. You know, you need the money, just go for the money and do as little as you can to get as much as you can. And God says the other way around, and serving one another. Brothers and sisters like to fight, and it's hard for them unless they're raised under those rules about learning to love each other and serve each other, that they can keep that. So we're fighting this all the time. And even the stealing thing, you know, we can steal minutes from other people. If we say, you know, for instance, we'll be here at a certain time, and we're not, we're stealing from people waiting on us. We're stealing their time. But also stealing can come in small ways, you know. Just picking up something that you know belongs to somebody else and forgetting to give it to them later, and then keeping it in your house for years and not returning things in a timely manner, those kind of things.
Yeah. Joe, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of echo what was said about the Ten Commandments, and I disagree that they're easily followed. I mean, maybe some are less of a challenge for some people, but you know, you think of the scripture that says to look after a woman, to lust after her is to commit adultery in your heart, or to hate somebody is to kill them. You know, like I think, yeah, thou shalt not kill. Yeah, I've never killed anybody, and that's been easy. But the spirit of the law, I think, is a challenge, and it's not just something I don't think that could be shrugged off or anything.
I agree. Simon?
I thought about bringing that up as well. It's not really about the specifics of the Ten Commandments. It's about everything that it entails. it's like having that in your heart and everything. So.
Yeah, just as Jesus said, on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So if you get into the nitty-gritty of everything, yeah, it's very confusing. But if you bring it back to just these two things, then you can work from there. Remember, we're trying to serve the Lord. And, of course, you know, your waiter doesn't always do a great job. So it's okay if we don't always do a great job, as long as we're trying, and we're trying to better ourselves, too. We need to overcome our own natural desires. In the world we live in, it's easy to distance ourselves from God. We see religion more like a hobby than a higher standard of living. We get so caught up in the nitty-gritty of life that we forget the simple commandments that God has given us. By doing that, we end up building walls and segmenting life into boxes. Like, you know, you get your family, work, church, friends, just to name a couple different areas of your life where it's easy for you to say, well, you know, I can think about God when I'm at church or with my family, but if I'm at work or I'm with my friends, then I'm more focused on thinking about myself or what's going on around me than what I should be doing. Since we've built these walls, it's easy to separate one from another. You may act one way at work and be a completely different person at home, with your friends, or at church. This puts your focus on the world instead of the Lord. We only put them in one or two boxes, and when we sin, or we want to get away from our heavenly responsibilities, we put our church box away so we don't feel guilty. So by doing that, it's harder for us to keep our eyes single to the glory of God. And here's an example. Many of us have had to work on a Sundays. And remember, it's not breaking the Sabbath if your job is a necessity, like being a police officer or a nurse or a plant operator. I put that in there for David and Kim. And what if we decide to go out to eat or to the store after work? That person's job is not a vital necessity, but we find it easy to forget that because we aren't focused. We are waiting on the Lord, just kind of sitting around waiting on the Lord, and we are caught up in our own life, and we didn't realize the mistakes we were making. And when we get in that monotonous grind of going to work or this or that, and we only focus on the Lord 1, 2, maybe 3 times a week, it's easy for us to get in the habit of, there have been times where I had to work on a Sunday, and I was like, man, I don't want to do this or that, and I'm already out. I might as well go to the store or pick up a gallon of milk or get a bite to eat. And it's easier for me to do that because I didn't go to church that morning, so the segmented work life doesn't really involve God, so it's easy for me to do that. But this is why we're supposed to be constantly serving, to have an eye single to the glory of God. Serving other people is a fundamental of the gospel. Is there anyone who wants to read Mosiah 1:49? Rachel.
And behold, I tell you these things that you may learn wisdom, that you may learn that when you are in the service of your fellow beings, you are only in the service of your God.
Yep. So, some people may find it easier to serve God, and that helps them serve other people. But I find it easier to serve other people, and that helps me serve God. If I ever feel tired or burnt out and I help someone with a service project, or I go help someone, I find it easier for me to then focus on God, because usually it's a humbling, it humbles me, being able to serve someone else. Um, oh, Rachel?
Something that I think is interesting to remember is that, does anybody know what the first thing that God made that wasn't good? It's when he made Adam and he looked upon him and saw that he was alone and saw that it wasn't good. So then he made Eve. So one of the things that's interesting is that human beings are hardwired to be around other people, and we're not supposed to really be alone. So I think that's really interesting, that the way that, God hardwired us is for us to actually reach out and help other people and be around other people and bring other people to him. And we're not supposed to just get into the grind of the day-to-day and get really focused on the one thing that we're doing.
Thank you. Bonnie?
Also, those boxes you were talking about that we put ourselves in sometimes, where we're this person here, we're that person here, that has to go. I mean, really, we have to be the same person. But we find ourselves acting differently with certain situations. And we have to evaluate that in our mind and figure out how we're going to be. And so when the Lord spoke about John the Baptist, he was someone without any guile either. And the Lord himself, guile meaning, the way I understand it, a deceit of yourself and deceiving, a spirit of wanting people to think this way of you, or that way of you. He was the same no matter where, and he spoke the truth no matter where. And so we have to blend those boxes together, and be the same person. And then we will be true to what our commitment is with the Lord.
Mm-hmm. One of the big things about compartmentalizing life like that, Rachel and I went to a married couples retreat a few years ago. Kendall Gino taught it. Was it last year? Okay. And one of the things he shared was how different men and women think. And he said, imagine boxes. Men have different, when they think of one thing, and really only one thing only. And then they put that box away, put it back on the shelf, and they open up another box. And women are a little bit more different. They're a little more complicated. They've got multiple things going on at the same time, like a computer screen. And they've got like a whole bunch of different pop-up windows, so they're all multitasking. So using the box metaphor there, it's not bad to have different thoughts per se, as long as they're the same. And one of the things I do that when I'm in my work box or when I'm at home or whatever is I try to keep the greatest two commandments in my head. Love the Lord with all thy heart, mind, and strength, and love thy neighbor as yourself. I also try to ask myself, am I glorifying God through my actions? And the answer is not always yes, but I try to. So if we can focus, if we can try to keep those two things in our head as we're going through our daily lives, it's easier for us to get in the habit of keeping his commandments. And Rachel, do you know how many days you're supposed to do something before it becomes a habit? Yeah, so it takes a while. And this is something that we should be striving to do, that we can always keep it focused in our head. Am I loving God with all my might? Am I loving my neighbor as myself? And then the harder laws can come forward. The places in the scriptures that we're like, oh man, that's really my weak point. I love meat in the summertime. And so, am I loving God with all thy might? Well, if I'm not keeping one of his commandments, Am I really? Am I wanting to please myself more than I'm willing to please the Lord by not following that commandment? Oh, Holly?
I just wanted to mention something that I thought of when you have, am I glorifying God through my actions? In the Doctrine and Covenants, it says that the glory of God is intelligence. So it seems to me that gaining intelligence, studying, and then acting upon what you've studied is how you glorify God. Of course, that would include serving, too. But I'm saying you need to have a knowledge of God in order to have that intelligence to glorify Him. You know what I'm saying? So I think studying would be one of the things that would be allowing us to glorify God through our life.
Yeah, I mean, when you're at work, this is mostly for the adults, or when you're at school, and you're trying to serve, me at my job, I'm trying to work for the hospital, try to keep the hospital safe and try to keep it warm and cool and whatnot. I'm working for the hospital. I'm in service of it. That means I have to be smart. I have to do my research. I have to know what I'm doing in order to do it right. And if I do it right, then I've done my job correctly. So just like working, serving the Lord, you have to know what you're doing in order to do it. That's why we research. That's why we study. That's why we come to Sunday school. And that's why we have thoughts and opinions. Is because do you have the scripture reference for that one? The glory of God being intelligence? Rachel had her hand up first, so we'll let Rachel talk and then go to Emma.
I think it is important to constantly gain knowledge, but with knowledge, it's only good if you apply it. So, for example, if I had the knowledge to cure cancer, it does nobody any good unless I actually apply it. So, I think that a lot of us get really tied up with just reading the scriptures and getting knowledge, but don't actually find a way to actually apply it.
Holly, did you find it?
It's section 90, verse 6. The glory of God is intelligence, or in other words, light and truth. And light and truth forsaketh that evil one. Every spirit of man was innocent in the beginning, and God having redeemed man from the fall, men became again in their infant state innocent before God. And it's just going about the wicked and light, disobedience, and whatnot.
Yeah, cool. Emma?
When you read the am I glorifying God through my actions, and you said a little bit of it, but I think it's something that can be kind of a struggle is, well, specifically for like church members, we know I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm here and I'm serving, and I think a big temptation for us is, are we doing the job that God actually wants us to do, or are we just doing the bare minimum so we can say we did it? Because God is going to know what our service really was, He's going to know whether we were really putting our heart, mind, and soul into it and really trying to do the best we could do with what the things He'd given us, or if we were like, this will be good enough, I'll just do it, it'll be fine, because then it's done, and technically I did it, so there, And that doesn't only apply to, service in the church, but, in our lives and in our jobs and the way that we care about other people or help other people who are in need. I think God, since God knows our thoughts and He knows what our true intentions are, I think that it's important to remember we need to really be trying to serve God, really glorify God through what we're doing, and not just do it because it's a commandment, or just so that we can say we did it.
Yeah, that's a pretty good point you brought up. Some people's bare minimum might be some people's maximum effort. And the people who are doing the bare minimum, they're like, oh, well, I mean, that person's doing a really good job, and they're doing that, so I can easily do that. That's super easy for me. Like, I know some people who have there's some people who have a different work schedule than me, and it's easier for them to, visit other people. There are some people who work odd hours, so it's harder for them to visit. So if they get 2 or 3 home visits in a week, and me, who I work 9 to 5, or I work a 9 to 5 job, so I've got my evenings off. Oh well, they're doing that, so and I can easily do that. You gotta. There's a little bit of trying to think of the right word. Being able to step back from yourself and judge things accordingly. Well, self-evaluation. You have to be really good at self-evaluation if you want to be able to give your best to the master. You want to know where are my strengths and where are my weaknesses, so I can improve my weaknesses. Next one.
I just want to make a correction that I said something wrong earlier, and that was that Jesus said John the Baptist was someone without guile. And then after I said that, I thought, that's not right. So I looked it up, and it's Nathaniel. Jesus said that about Nathaniel, that he is Israelite without any guile. And I'm saying that so Andrew, whose middle name is Nathaniel, will take that to heart as well. That's a good trait.
Bessie?
I think that not only do we need to be aware of our physical actions, we need to be aware of what we say and think before we speak. And is this going to be something that is going to actually lift this person up, or is this something that's going to create anger or hard feelings in some way?
Yeah, exactly. Not only do we glorify God through our actions, we also glorify God through what we do, say, and think. And that's because we're always being watched, whether we know it or not. I always feel upset when I see someone with a religious bumper sticker being a jerk on the road, because I'm like, come on, man, you're witnessing. You've got this witness on the back of your car, and here's how you're representing your witness, right? Or, you can always tell. You can always tell when there's someone who's been going to church or was at church earlier, because they're usually dressed nicer, and you'll see them, out at restaurants, or just going to the store real quick just to get something they could get any other time, and you're witnessing there. You're saying, well, I've been to church and I know what the commandment is, but it doesn't really apply to me, right? So, exactly, it's not just what we do; it's also what we say. Bring it back to serving. If we try to constantly be in waiting service, then it will be easier for us to remember what God has set us up to do. This is because service takes our focus off ourselves and places it on others' needs. The biggest need that we all have is we need to try to build the kingdom of Zion. Who wants to read Doctrine and Covenants, section 5? 3 or 4 verses there. Section 5. Or, oh, nuts. That's not the right chapter. No, it's not section 5, I don't think. Section 145. section 140, verse 5. There we go. Holly, you want to read it? You got it?
The church is admonished again that all movements toward Zion and the gathering and temporalities connected therewith are within my law, and all things should be done in order. The advice and counsel of the elders and of the bishop and his council be sought and be honored when received, as before enjoined, though of necessity their counsel, when given, is not intended to dictate or to deny any man his agency. The work of preparation and the perfection of my saints go forward slowly, and Zionic conditions are no further away nor closer than the spiritual condition of my people justifies. But my word shall not fail, neither will my promises, for the foundation of the Lord standeth sure.
All right. A lot kind of talking there. There's actually two different subjects in that grouping of verses that I kind of want to bring up. One is 5a. The church is admonished again that all movements toward Zion and the gathering and temporalities connected therewithin are within my law, and all things should be done in order. Right? So the church is admonished again. Does anyone know what the word admonished means? There's two very different definitions that I found online. Lonnie?
One, admonishing can be dressing down. In other words, correcting in a strong manner. And that's what I think that admonishing here is telling people this is what the ideal is, this is what we want to do, this is what we're striving to do. So we're admonishing, we keep reminding over and over that this is it.
Yep. Any other input on the word admonish? So what I found is an urge or a duty, like to remind. I am urging you. This is important, right? But you're correct. Some of the definitions of the word admonished is more of a corrective reprimand. You know, not in a mean way, more as in a constructive, like a teacher would a student, right? So this is God through Israel A, who's giving this revelation, saying, again, all movement towards Zion and the gathering and all of the other things are within my law, which means these should be done. We should be gathering in, right? And that's talking about if we want to build Zion, we should be gathering in. And then the advice and the counsel of the elders and the bishop and the council be sought and honored when received. Through necessity, their counsel when given is not intended to dictate or deny any man his agency. So we shouldn't be going out telling people to gather in and like a dictate to like a dictative leadership. David.
Perhaps my wife is going to say similar topics, but I think what that means is, and what I'm reading there is from the top verse 5a and 5b, I think even probably then and even today, when people decide, well, we're going to move to Zion, they just quit their jobs. They don't have any support structure. They just move here and expect to be taken care of for an indefinite period of time until whatever else is going to happen. I don't believe people were probably given that counsel back then. They probably were told, learn a skill, something that is transferable, let's say, whether it be, back in the day, learn how to make barrels or learn how to, do whatever. Don't be a fisherman. What? Oh, right. Maybe, yeah, a sea captain maybe wouldn't be such a great thing to move to Zion, but they were probably told, make yourself successful, learn how to work, this and that, and then find some sort of situation here that would support yourself, and then move. And I think that's what it's saying. The counsel of the elders should be sought and honored when received. So I think a certain number of people say, well, God's telling me to move, I'm going to move. But if they're warned, please make preparation. Like I've always been told by people I respect, don't quit your job before you have another job to go to. It's kind of backwards. Now there may be situations where that's worked out for someone, but for me, I've tried to make sure if I do quit those next couple of weeks or whatever, I'll have another job to go to. And I think it's similar there. People need to take the counsel. But I guess people have their agency. If they choose to do it differently, that's their business.
Mm-hmm. And before I get to Holly and then Bonnie, I saw this and I was like, okay, so this is the council is not intended to dictate or deny man his agency, so we're not supposed to force people to come to Zion, but we are told to gather in. Bonnie,
I think that second paragraph is referring to the fact that people, the Lord has given us a commandment to move to Zion, to gather.
Yeah, it's
and
right there.
Right. Now, it has to be done in order, meaning that, like we were talking about, you got to line up jobs, you got to go beforehand and see all the conditions that would be conducive to moving your family and doing it in a wise manner. Now, the advice and counsel of the elders and the bishop and his counsel, that means that you seek advice and wisdom from other sources. There may be some that are diametrically opposed to the other. You have to make the decision in the end. And it says, so don't worry about this dictation. Somebody says you do this. This is the way to do it because it worked for me. But for some reason, it won't work for you in that particular specific way. That doesn't mean that you have to feel like you have to follow that. You have to make your own decision, so you have to have your own agency. It doesn't mean you're going against the commandment to gather. It means you have to use wisdom from all sources and make a decision that works for your family, getting you here, your work. If you're a sea captain, for instance, you have to find another line of work if you're coming to Zion. Maybe the Lord wants you to be a sea captain for a while and then change occupations, and do something else. Maybe you can teach about sea or something, maybe you can be a recruiter at the naval station. Who knows? But there's all kinds of ways, and it's just saying that you don't have to take the advice given by them if it doesn't work for your situation. You have to take everything into consideration. You take the advice that is the wisest with prayer and with using you have to make a decision.
Mm-hmm. And that's something I actually want to state. I think I might have come off saying, oh, well, you don't have to come here because it says we're not supposed to dictate you or deny your agency, so you don't have to come to Zion. No. What I meant was kind of what Bonnie was saying, is we're not supposed to let the council of the people dictate what we do as far as, well, the bishop said I have to give up, all of my food and not keep any for myself, and that's not wise, that was actually kind of a weak example. The bishop wouldn't say that. Yeah. So we're supposed to gather as much information and, counsel as we can, and then make a decision based off that counsel. Don't let that counsel be our decision. Right? Holly?
I was just going to say that I think that in the scriptures a lot of times, and this is just an example of it, we are not to be in a cult, basically, is what it's saying. We're getting advice, we're getting a counsel. God's given us a commandment, and the advice and counsel is ideas on how to do that. But if, people that get into a cult situation, even with the Latter-day Saint movements, there's been cults where people no longer think on their own. And God has many times said, don't do that. Mm-hmm. You have to have your own agency to do what you believe is the right thing to do. And so I think that's put throughout the scriptures for a reason. And I was just going to point out that it's there.
Yeah. Mark?
Two things. There's also in the Doctrine and Covenants earlier, before this period in time, where God says that he who waits to be commanded is a slothful servant. And then the second thing is, I believe Joseph Smith III made a statement, I think it's in Inez Davis's book, that basically don't come till you're spiritually prepared. Don't come until you're spiritually prepared.
Yeah.
Joseph Smith III made a statement like that.
That's why you may not be actively, like I may not be packing my bags and moving to Zion, but that's why that all movements towards Zion. So you should be trying to spiritually prepare yourself to move to Zion before you come to Zion, exactly. But saying, well, I'm not ready to go to Zion yet, and not doing anything about it, that's where the slothfulness comes in, And it would be unwise to just, oh, all right, well, I'm just going to go to Zion. I'm just going to show up at a church, and I'm going to be like, okay, I'm here. Find me a job, find me a place to live, kind of help me out with some of these things I've been working with, when in reality on your own, or with the work of those around you and the scriptures, you should be trying to spiritually prepare yourself and physically prepare yourself before gathering into Zion. And that's what I think they're trying to get, that all movements towards Zion part. Bessie?
I agree with what Bonnie said, that it's commandment that we should gather into Zion and that we should do it in order. But I think we are also taught that we should fast and pray and seek counsel of people possibly who are already in Zion, so that we know what to expect. And I think if we do that, God doesn't ever give us a commandment that he doesn't give us a way to keep that commandment. And I think that if as we fast and pray and seek counsel, that God will go ahead of us and he will open up the way for us to have a place to live or a job or whatever it is that we need to keep that commandment.
Mm-hmm. To kind of tie it all back, one of the reasons why I brought this up is because we're called to build as a city of Zion, and we're supposed to serve the Lord, right? We're trying to serve, be in waiting for the Lord. And this is where this part kind of comes in. The work and preparation and the perfection of my saints go forward slowly. The Zionic conditions are no further away, nor any closer than the spiritual condition of my people justifies. Right? So now that we've gathered in, because we have, because we're all here, we're now supposed to be working on the spiritual condition of each other and of those around us. And how can we keep the spiritual condition? What's one of the best ways we can do that? By keeping his commandments. Perfect, Rachel. It's like you helped me with this. So, kind of trying to tie it all in. If we want to build Zion, we should be serving the Lord. And if we want to be serving the Lord, we want to be keeping the commandments. And if we keep the commandments, we're building Zion. It's kind of like a nice little loop there. Um, this isn't my last slide, but it's not working. Could go with. All right. So we can take that Doctrine and Covenants 140, verse 5, is that the spiritual condition of the people of Zion are important. And we know that we can improve our spiritual condition by keeping the greatest commandment. Yay. Yeah. So what are some of the ways to serve, and how can we implement them into our daily lives? This is the last part. We're going to have more discussion. So what's one way we can serve, and then how can we implement that in our life? Because keep his commandments. Oh, well, okay. How can we implement that? By keeping the two greatest commandments and our, trying to think about them all the time. That way, it just becomes second nature when we're making decisions. Holly, over here.
I think if you you had mentioned it one time before, that you know your strengths and you know your weaknesses, and you use your strengths to serve, and you work on your weaknesses. So if you think about the things that you are capable of doing, and find ways to serve the Lord with those things. So let's say that you have some kind of physical disability, and you're not going to be able to be out there working out in the yard, but there you could do calls on the phone, or and be the phone chain person, or you could be the person who sends out thank you notes to the ministers who come and visit, or you could. There's so many other things that you can do that maybe somebody else that could go out in the yard, they're going to spend their time doing that. So a lot of times there's one thing I was thinking is sometimes when you say you are doing a lot of things that you can do, it's best to leave those things that you know someone else can do to volunteer for. You know what I mean? Like, for instance, if you're doing 4 or 5 different jobs and a job comes up that you could do, it's better to leave that job for someone else to do because you're already doing all those. Give them the opportunity to do those things, So, I mean, thinking of others isn't always just doing everything. Sometimes it's giving that other person an opportunity to do something, not because you're lazy, because you're thinking, how can I help them learn to serve? What can I do for them in that way? And it's something that I always say to some of my friends when I'm going to have that, or I'm asking them to do something. I say something like, look, this will be a jewel in your crown. Give them the opportunity to serve too,
Emma?
Something that I think sometimes you don't expect but can happen is just being aware of what you're good at. Something that I've been learning through school is at the end of the semester, after we've had a client the whole semester, for speech pathology is the supervisors will usually have us set goals for what we'd like to improve on the next semester. And sometimes they would ask, so what did you think you did really well? And sometimes, like, I was caught off guard by that, and I was like, a lot of times it's really easy to see, for some people. For some people, maybe not, but for some people it's really easy to see all of your flaws and, oh, I can't do that, oh, I'm not very good at that. And it's really hard to sit down and think, like, what am I good at? What has God given me as a talent or a gift? And then the extra thing we have to do is think, how can I implement that talent into a way that can serve others, bring Zion, So that's not an easy thing to do for a lot of people, but it's important to do, again, to be aware of yourself and aware of your strengths and whether you're using your strengths to serve God, or if there's, something that maybe you're taking on too much and so you can't do the jobs that you're supposed to do as well as the Lord would like you to do them, So anyway, that was a little rambling, but that's all.
Finally, this next statement.
Well, let's see if I have a senior moment here. Um, the serving, there was a minister, there is a minister who, he's kind of famous, Tony Evans. He would, whenever anyone wanted to become a member of his church, he gave them a job. They never just came in to sit and be a pew potato. He always gave them a job. And that's basically, Christians should be action people, not just pew potatoes. In other words, you should be doing something that serves your brothers and sisters and other people around, and be a witness in some way. So people, a lot of people think that they can go to a church and just sit down and be ministered to, and that's what they want. And they don't want any part of being a minister. But that's not what the Lord called us to do. So if we're pew potatoes, we're not doing the Lord's work. We need to put it into action by doing something for the people around. And so if people would think of it in that way, that Christians are not to be pew potatoes, but action people.
Just the action potatoes. Not pew potatoes, action potatoes. David, you had your hands raised?
One of the things they're doing at our hospital, in some ways I sometimes wonder if they're desperate to try and improve their customer experience, they do some weird things that I think to improve the image. Now this particular thing I think is a new management philosophy, and probably if Mark Swanson was here he could confirm this, but they sent out an email a couple weeks ago about, I think they called it managing up. And I'm like, what? And they said, when you're doing your daily job and you're out and about and you see patients, family members or visitors to the hospital, always say something nice about your department or one of the other departments. And I thought, okay. Now, I got to thinking about that, and some of the guys in plant services, they sit in the shop where they're not out in the hall or around other people. I would never bring my family to this hospital. This is the worst place ever. And I'm like, yeah, go find another place to work, you know. I've always felt like we've gotten reasonable care and reasonable service. We've come home alive out of all the experiences we've had. So generally, yeah, I'm happy with the hospital. So I got to thinking about that, and it reminded me of when I was a kid. And on this topic of service, this may have been the very year I met the Nolan family, or possibly the year before, 1979 or 78. There was a reunion, and at maybe one of the closing services or toward the end of the reunion, it was either a 70 or a patriarch stood up, and I think he spoke under the Spirit, and he talked to the congregation, and he pointed out, he had a good knowledge of everybody that was there. He pointed out those that were serving in the background. They weren't dynamic speakers or well-educated people or whatever. And man, the emotion that came out of that when he pointed out the way these people were able to serve. Like my mom, she cooked for the reunion. She would do home-cooked meals for 150 or 200 people, and it was not these big corporate type meals. They were meals like you would get if you went to someone's house and you had 10 people there. You know, everything was really good. she would make homemade cinnamon rolls, and enough advertisement for my mom. But she did that as a service to others, and didn't expect any thank you. But of course, she always got a lot of praise for the cooking because everybody likes that at a reunion. But there were a lot of other people doing background type things. And this service, when that guy stood up and he pointed that out, he mentioned people's names, and boy, they would really get emotionally breaking down in tears and things when their name was brought up, because they knew what kind of work they'd been doing. And to have a little bit of recognition that way meant a lot. So I think as we serve, I think we need to be conscious of showing appreciation. I think I mentioned that this morning in our priesthood meeting. When we serve together, we need to recognize the service of others and what a blessing that is to us too.
Exactly. So, we've learned today, we serve God by keeping his commandments, and we serve each other, then we can help bring forward the city of Zion. And I really like what David and Emma and all of you guys have said, is that it's not just the things you see. It's not just the things you see is the way you can serve. Coming to church is a way to serve, because I love seeing on your faces here. It makes me happy to see you. And even though you may not feel like you're doing anything, you are actively serving. Because I can say this for everyone here. I've seen you all actively serve. I can't wait to see you two serve eventually. I'll see you more here. All right.
Right after church, whenever, thank you. We're going to have a quick business meeting to vote on the priesthood call of Samuel McLean. Unless things change, I talked to him a little bit about the schedule for possible ordination, and we're trying to work that out. I'll talk to Jim also and see when he's going to be available. He's going to be part of that. So we will plan that as quickly, or as soon as practicable. There was something else I was going to say, but that slipped my mind. So, yes, if you have something really quick that Holly didn't have on the thing, go ahead. Does somebody have a mic she could use real quick? But that's the 16th. I guess we'll have a potluck dinner, so between the service and the potluck. Oh, the other thing was I'd like to do a leadership meeting real quick after the potluck. And if we handle it well, it won't run into the late afternoon. So think about leadership meeting ideas, and we'll run that right after the potluck dinner on the 16th. Does somebody have a mic for Bonnie? Hello? Sorry I caught you guys unaware or unprepared or whatever. Sure.
I'm inviting the women to come to my place Saturday the 15th, okay, for a luncheon meeting and it'll be like a brunch and luncheon meeting. And about 11:30 at my house, we will have a meeting also for planning, and I'll make some other announcements also about some of the things we'll do. And so if you can do it, please let me know if you need a ride or need some help or something, okay? Because that's what I'm planning, okay?
do I feel old today? Back there with all these young guys, and I was like, other than Mark, I'm the only elder here, and man, I feel old. But it's a pleasure to serve with the young men that have decided to put their hands to the plow and work in the Lord's service. So that makes me feel really good. A few minutes ago, and some are here now that weren't there when I announced it, in a couple weeks, on the 16th, Sunday the 16th, we're going to have a quick business meeting following the service to vote on the ordination to the office of teacher for Samuel McLean. And so I hope you're all here for that. And then as soon as prudent, we will schedule a ordination service. And we'll try to get that worked out very soon after that. For our scripture reading this morning, I wanted to read some scriptures that contain waiting on the Lord, because that's our, where did Ryan go? Oh, there he is back there. Ryan's class this morning was like that, and I think lively and well received, so I appreciate that. But I wanted to read 3 different scriptures about that. Psalm 27:14. Thou didst say unto me, wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he shall strengthen thy heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. And I hope it's not just sitting around on your camp stool waiting for something to happen. You're actually getting up and serving, waiting as a waiter would do. 37, Psalm 37:34. Wait on the Lord and keep his way, and he shall exalt thee to inherit the land. When the wicked are cut off, thou shalt see it. And from Proverbs 20:22. Say not thou, I will recompense evil, but wait on the Lord, and he shall save thee. So I guess there you're waiting on the Lord to do his thing for the wrongs that have been committed. But anyway, as we work together to do those things that he's called us to do, I hope that we will all be found serving and waiting on the Lord. Let's turn in our hymnal to start the service to hymn number 159. And we'll stand and sing this together and remain standing for an invocation by Ben McLean, number 159.
Father in heaven, we're so grateful we could all meet together here this morning, and I pray your Spirit would be here with us in our service today, that as we remember the gift of your Son, and I pray that your Holy Spirit would inspire my brother Joseph as he brings our message today. And I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Good morning. I have been asked to bring you all a communion charge today. So get ready to be charged. I wanted to read every time. I was thinking a lot about what I was supposed to say for a communion charge this morning, because I didn't remember it or know about it before this morning. So, and I was thinking, like, what do people need to hear before taking the sacrament? A very important ordinance. And I thought every time I am do something a lot, like in repetition, anytime it's part of my routine, a lot of times I forget why I do it, forget the reason. I'm sure none of you have forgotten why we take these sacraments, okay? But what I wanted to do was read out of section 17 and then of one other verse from the scriptures as a reminder, so that it's clear in our minds. So if you'll bear with me. Section 22. It is expedient that the church meet together often to partake of the bread and wine in remembrance of the Lord Jesus. And the elder or priest shall administer it, and after this manner he shall administer it. He shall kneel with the church and call upon the Father in the solemn prayer, saying, and we all know the prayer, we'll hear it in a minute. In remembrance of him. That's an important part of this, because back in ancient times, when people would make a covenant with one another, there was a tradition a lot of times that they would take on a secondary name, that of the person with whom they would be taking the covenant. And in that sort of spirit, we think of we are Christians. We have taken on the name of Jesus in spirit, and literally we're taking on his name, Christians. We are followers of Christ. And likewise, he one-upped us, and he became a man. He became Son of Man. And it was sort of just a way to emphasize how important this covenant is. I'd like to read one other thing. This is out of Matthew 26. And as they were eating, Jesus took bread and brake it and blessed it and gave to his disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is in remembrance of my body, which I give a ransom for you." And he took the cup and gave thanks and drank it to them, saying, "Drink ye all of it, for this is in remembrance of my blood of the New Testament, which is shed for as many as shall believe on my name for the remission of their sins. And I give unto you a commandment." Remember what we learned in class about commandments and what we're supposed to do with them. "I give unto you a commandment, that ye shall observe to do the things which ye have seen me do, and bear record of me even unto the end." Let's take some time to prepare.
Thank you, Joe. As we continue our preparation for the sacrament, let's turn to hymn number 181 as the emblems are being prepared, and we'll remain seated and sing this. Number 181. as the prayer over the bread is read by Benjamin McLean, shall we please kneel as much as possible?
O God, the eternal Father, we ask thee in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ, to bless and sanctify this bread to the souls of all those who partake of it, that they may eat in remembrance of the body of thy Son, and witness unto thee, O God, the eternal Father, that they are willing to take upon them the name of thy Son, and always remember him, and keep his commandments which he has given them, that they may always have his Spirit to be with them. Amen.
Now, as the prayer over the wine is read by Thoric Smith, shall we please kneel as much as possible?
O God, the eternal Father, we ask thee in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ, to bless and sanctify this wine to the souls of all those who drink of it, that they may do it in remembrance of the blood of thy Son, which was shed for them, that they may witness unto thee, O God, the eternal Father, that they do always remember him, and they may have his Spirit to be with them. Amen.
We will be taking the sacrament to Richard and Dean Smith after the service, so I hope that you will keep them in your prayers. I know if they were physically able to be here, they would just relish the chance to meet with the saints. So keep them in your prayers, if you would.
Good morning again. For those of you who may not know me, I am Joe McLean. I'm one of the lost McLeans. Okay. I live in Columbia, Missouri, so a couple hours away. I don't get to be here as much as I would like, but I was asked to speak today. Speaking in front of people is something that I do on a regular basis. I tallied it up the other day, and I realized that with the viewers of the TV station at which I work, combined with the listeners of the radio station at which I work, and the Facebook page that I operate for myself and my own Twitter page, along with the Twitter page of the TV station that I work, which I have control over, and the Twitter and Facebook and pages of both news agencies that I work, I actually have the voice and the power to reach more than 100,000 people. But I don't abuse that though, which the temptation is there. So what I'd like to do, and my point there though is that I'm very comfortable speaking in front of people, but not this group of people that's watched me grow up and know all the mistakes that I've made and how ignorant I truly am. This is where I truly get nervous. So hopefully I won't live up to my embarrassment. But I just had a few thoughts today. I like speakers always say, I was really considering what I was going to speak about today, and it kind of was just on my mind for several weeks, and I never really wrote anything down. And until recently, I was able to go. I had the great opportunity to go to the Geneseo reunion this year, and it was a really great experience. I hadn't been to a reunion in a while. I just get so busy, and it's hard to take a week off, as you all know. But I was able to take the week off and go to the Geneseo reunion, which was really great. It was a combination of a whole bunch of the different factions of the RLDS. Like there was a group of remnant saints there. There were some people who were unaffiliated. A lot of my family was there. A lot of you were there as well. And it got me to thinking about the state of the church, and more specifically, it got me to think about our relationship with God, the relationship of the church with God, and the relationship of each one of us, and the state of each of those compared to one another. I'll explain. As long as I've been alive, unfortunately, and a lot of my siblings, a lot of the young people can compare with this, is that I've grown up in the church, and it's always seemed, I have here, defined by quarrels, and its legacy seems to be one of bickering and schism. Now that's not all that the legacy is, but that's just what I see. I've seen, even when I was young, I remember our church being full, and other branches being full, and we would work, with these other branches. And as I've grown up, I've seen people leave, get offended, and walk away and split. And well, we don't agree with you on this thing, and so we'll just worship on our own, And it's obviously been disappointing to me. It's been disappointing to all of us. And I was thinking about that, and that was confusing to me, because I know that this is the true church. This is the true gospel, and I want to kind of explain how I know that. I have faith that this is the true gospel. This is God's church. This isn't only our God's church. This is the church of the God that so many other doctrines and factions and churches and religions believe in. And my faith, the Spirit allows me, the Spirit gives me faith. Every time I pray and I study, which isn't as much as I should, I gain faith. I gain the Spirit in it, and it reaffirms the things that I was taught as a child. But my faith isn't the only thing. The Spirit isn't the only thing that gives me faith that this is the true church. In addition to that, I've learned everything that I've learned as a child. I grew up learning the 10 Commandments and the 6 fundamental principles of the gospel, and learning about life after death and how God operates and how He's unchanging, how He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And it's the philosophies I've learned here contrast to every other religion, and it's because of that consistency. It's because it makes sense. It's the only thing that logically makes sense, consistent with what we know as God. The doctrines that you see in other churches and other religions, even other factions of Christianity, or even other factions of Latter-day Saintism, is that Latter-day Saintism, I hate that term. It makes it sound like a cult. But the doctrines in a lot of these other churches, they change with the world. They adapt to the world in order to garner more followers, or more. They adjust it to fit into people's lives, so it can easily fit in as a part of their lives. It's a secondary thing that they can always have it. Now, in a weird way, that's a nice sentiment, But the gospel isn't changing. God isn't changing. And God's not supposed to come secondary. The building of the kingdom is not supposed to come secondary. It's supposed to be the forefront of our lives. And that's what the mainstream can't work, with them. Or they don't let it work. These other religions, they shapeshift and adapt to the moralities and beliefs of a world that is becoming more sinful and traveling far away from God every minute of every day. And when you think about that, that's disheartening, because the world's not getting better. And if these churches are following and the direction of the world, then that means the churches aren't getting any better either. That's why I have belief in this church, because as long as I've been here, especially worshiping specifically in this house, is that I've never heard any inconsistency or anything from the time I was born to now. And people have come and gone. Not everybody, but people have come and gone because their faith has led them somewhere else, or something else has led them somewhere else. But I want to share with you a thing that was put in my mind this week, and that is that this gospel and this church, I love working in analogies. I absolutely love reading the parables that God, Christ taught, because it was, what did it say? Earthly stories with a heavenly meaning. So things that we can understand, and then we go, oh yeah, it is like that. I really appreciate that God put a type and shadow in all things that allows our minds to grasp the spiritual things that we might not otherwise be able to understand. Well, I thought of one, and that is that this gospel and this church are meant to be like a lighthouse. I'm sure maybe you've heard of this before, but it was something I was thinking a lot about. And a lighthouse is perched solidly on a rock. A lighthouse is unyielding in the winds and the storms, anything that comes at it. Lighthouses are there. They're always there, and they don't move. The lighthouses are meant to guide the people who are lost, who need to find their way back. They're perched steadfast, and they're unchanging, and that is what allows people who are trying to navigate their way back to the land, back to where they, where they're going, and with consistency they stand there, and obviously they shine light, which that analogy says itself. It's an unbreaking beam of light through any storms or rough seas, or whether it's clear or stormy, it's always there. It's immovable, ideally. If a giant hurricane comes up, an earthly lighthouse would get torn to pieces. But this spiritual lighthouse, it doesn't. It never moves. And the reason it never moves, the reason it can't move to be effective is if it were moving around, it could not be trusted as a point of navigation for people who are trying to navigate. If it's moving around, well, I don't know, it's Tuesday, so usually Tuesdays it's over there on the other side of the pier, but I don't, it just couldn't be trusted. The fact that it stands without moving, without flinching, is what gives it its power as a point of navigation. I want to share a testimony about when I was called to the priesthood. I know I've got a younger brother who's soon going to be entering the priesthood, Samuel. But this was about 10 years ago. I was 17 years old, and it was, well, I'll tell you the story. I was attending CPRS, which was obviously is a really good environment because I was able to grow in my faith amongst, my peers, my own age, and it was a really great environment to learn about that and consider these very important responsibilities. Now, I was called during the Joint Conference of Restoration Branches that year. It was 2008, and it wasn't at the gathering place. It was at somewhere with a big gym. I can't remember. One of you probably remember where it was. Where? I think that was it. Yes. But anyway, it was after one of the evening services. My grandfather, Jim Noland. Many of you are familiar with him. He came up to me after the service and said, "Hey, we're just going to have a chat. If you can come over." So I came over to his house. In his study at the old Brentwood house, if any of you guys have ever been in that house, you know how intimidating the study is. My siblings can attest. Grandmother's laughing over there because the study was a place where we weren't allowed to go in and play or anything when we were kids. And there were leather chairs and there was knickknacks all over. Like there was a ship in a bottle, and it was like grandfather had traveled around the world, and so it was very intimidating. I think there was a sword or something that I didn't ever know if he used or not on somebody. Yes, there was and there was a lion sitting at a porcelain lion sitting at petting distance at grandfather's chair. So it was an intimidating room. So I knew it was serious, but I didn't know what he wanted to talk to me about. George Knotts was a 70. He was in the room as well. He came sit down, and they had told me that I was being called. I had a call to the office of priest. For me, it was really unexpected because I know as long as I've been alive, I've always been, and maybe it's the same for everybody, but I always felt like I was more aware of my unworthiness and my sins than other people. I would just always, and I'm sure maybe everybody thinks that, but at that time I was like, me? I don't think so. Like, I honestly was overwhelmed with that, and I was overwhelmed with the feeling of I am nowhere near close to that amount of responsibility, because I had read section 17 before, and I had known the duties, and I looked up to the priesthood, and I still do, of course, and I knew, like, I don't know, and so grandfather got to talking to me about it and everything, and I was asked to, obviously consider it and take as much time as I needed. But I did take it very seriously. I prayed very earnestly. I fasted about it, and I just couldn't see myself, because I knew once I was ordained and I undertook the responsibility, that is a lifelong commitment. That means I am taking responsibility not only for my soul, which I already had responsibility for, but in a way I saw it as I'm one of the priesthood, and the priesthood are meant to be the people who shepherd the congregation. We're servants. We're not above, obviously, anybody else, but we are charged with making this whole church thing work. And I was like, I barely know anything, and so it was a very serious thing. I was losing sleep over it, and I remember that. And I had talked to a lot of my friends who, like my friends who had already been ordained. A few of my friends in high school, slightly older or even my same age, had already received calls and been ordained. And I was talking to them, and they didn't help me. I get the sense, I won't give names, but some of them, I didn't feel like they really grasped it, and so it was so concerning to me, because I didn't want to go up to them and say no, but I had to figure out a way to say no, because it was too much responsibility for me. But I was praying, and I read scriptures like Philippians 4:13, that God promises to give you the strength to supplement your own strength with His, which is infinitely greater, and other things. And but finally, I had prayed, and it was getting close to the time where I was just gonna have to say, I want to wait at least, But I woke in the middle of the night, and I remember feeling such the Spirit so heavily impressed upon me, and I was like, "Ooh, what's this? Am I sick?" But it was confirmed to me. I felt that you guys know what the feeling the Holy Spirit is like. You're overwhelmed with joy, and it was a confirmation, and I heard. The Lord just impressed upon me. It wasn't something that I heard, like I didn't hear God speak, and I was like, "Oh, that's a weird accent, God." No, it was. It was impressed upon me that the Lord would guide and direct me through this. It was my choice to make, and it was the kind of thing where I'm going to hugely paraphrase what was impressed upon me, but it was, we got this. I was like, okay. And after that, when I woke up in that morning, I felt, the night before going to bed, I felt that I was going to call Dad and Grandfather and them the next day and say, I want to wait. I just don't, not right now. I just can't do that right now. But I woke up that morning and I immediately said, I'm ready. I am 100% ready. And I knew that it wasn't going to be an easy task, and it's not an easy task or anything. God doesn't really ask us to do easy tasks. I mean, because they're easy. But that was 10 years ago now, and I've had successes and failings in my office. But it hasn't shaken my faith that this is all to say that I do believe that this is the one true church of the living God. I know that we are called to be that lighthouse, the light of the world. So I thought my confusion when I said at the beginning that I was confused as to why there were so many different branches that just won't work together. You go here and you can't serve communion, or over here they do it differently, and that's not the way we do it, or, and it seems meaningless. It really does. I understand, though, that with spiritual things, when people are passionate about them, they're number one. They're in their hearts, and there's no compromising when it's number one. It's harder to change when it's the most important thing in your life. But I was confused in that, and I was trying to figure out why, and the answer is, of course, a lot of things. So this morning, I just want to examine a few things that might give us a clear picture on how to solve the problems, some of the problems that are in our church, mainly the one of these walls that are up between us. I'd like to do another analogy for you, if you can, I would like to think about the RLDS broken down like a house. Okay. Now, what is a house made of? Well, it's made of walls and ceilings and windows and doors and power outlets and everything. Yeah, it's all kinds of fiberglass insulation. But for now, for this analogy, houses are made out of walls. And what are walls made out of? They're made out of bricks. Okay? Are you with me? I want to think about this as you think about the church, and that the church as a whole, that the children of God are broken up into, they're made up of, the church made up of branches. Branches are made up of families. Families are made up of marriages or individuals, and that's where you get down to the unit of. And you could go down even farther into an individual's person and examine their spiritual life, their physical health, their mental well-being, but we won't do that. What I'd like to focus on is our individual relationship with God, and how that has to be the number one thing that we focus on. Our relationship with God needs to be more important than our relationship with our branch, or how the branch functions, or how the church functions. Our own individual relationship with God needs to come above that. It needs to be placed at a higher priority and take the top spot in our allocation of time. And I'll explain. When you think about a house and you think about the walls thereof, I love using words like that, and you think about and the bricks that make up that wall. Think of us, each individual person in this room and in the church, as one of those bricks. Now, if this brick is weak, if it's not solid, if it's not together, if it's not done with good masonry, and if the slaves of Israel have to make it without straw, then it's going to just crumble. It's going to fall apart. Now think about a wall made out of those bricks. Is that wall going to be structurally sound at all? I submit that it would not. And the house made up of those walls won't stand either. But let's say, I'm not saying you're all crumbly bricks or anything like that. But think about just think about one brick that's crumbly in a wall. If that brick falls apart, that whole wall is weaker. The whole wall is weaker. And if the whole wall is weaker, it devalues the entire house. We had a thing just this year happen in Jefferson City where 115 or 120-year-old building in Jefferson City. Jefferson City is an old city. It was a really, really old building, and a whole wall just came down, collapsed, and it left bricks and building materials all over the street. They had to close it down. It was a big mess, and they had to just decide what to do because it was a really old building and everything, and it was in the downtown area. And here's another part of this analogy is that the building owner decided not too long ago, actually, that they're going to tear down the building, the whole building, because of this one wall that came down. It was an important wall, and it came down, and it created a huge amount of problems, because when they tear down the building, the other buildings around it are so interconnected that they were going to be at risk too when they tore this one building down. And we ran the financials of it, of the valuation of that entire of the entire street and thereby the entire neighborhood, and saw what the financial effect was going to be on that with regards to valuation and how much this was going to set back the refurbishment efforts in this part of the city. And it was staggering. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars just from this one wall that fell. And that neighborhood or that street being devalued also devalues the ward. And when a ward is devalued, then that devalues the entire city. Do you understand? It's a singular thing that can have huge effects. Houses can't be built with walls like that. They can't be built with bricks like that. And that's why I'm trying to say we have to start with strong bricks. We really have to start with strong bricks. We have to start with our relationship with God being rock solid, and that's the thing we need to work on the most. And then we need to work on our families and have strong families in order to build a strong branch. And a lot of that is my job as an Aaronic priesthood member, and it gives me encouragement that while it's just logistically difficult for me to get into the homes and make sure that our bricks and our walls are being built correctly, but it encourages me to see the Aaronic priesthood in this branch getting a lot of that work done. And I told them last night that it's every member of this branch's job to help them in that and to help get the Aaronic priesthood into the homes and make sure that we've got a strong foundation. I want to read a couple of scriptures in this point. The first one from Matthew 22. Matthew 22:36. I'm sure you guys have heard this, if not have it memorized, but I want to read it. Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind. You guys are probably rolling your eyes because you've heard this so much. Hold on. But I have a new point to make. This is the first and the greatest commandment, and the second is like unto it, Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Here's something that you may have overlooked when you're thinking about that. And I've got a couple more in the same vein. something that you may be overlooking when you think about that is that what God is doing there is he's not only saying that the first great commandment is to love God, and the second is to love thy neighbor. So it's obviously, in this one, it's obviously more important, or it's a greater commandment to love God. But they're so intertwined. He said, like unto it. These both go hand in hand. Loving God allows you a model, allows you an answer about how to love each other. But the first great commandment is to love God. Keep your relationship with God where it needs to be. Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 through 14. I'm going to get to it here. I don't know if you're like me. I actually like reading out of the book. Starting in verse 12. It's Colossians chapter 3, starting in verse 12. Put on, therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved bowels of mercies, kindness, humbleness of mind, meekness, and long-suffering. Forbearing one another and forgiving one another, and if any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do ye. And above all these things, put on charity, which is the bond of perfectness. Now, we hear that a lot in the scripture. This is just one example of when they say, do something the same way that I am doing for you. Whether it's God or whether it's Christ, the living manifestation of God, or the Spirit, like it gives the example of how we need to treat each other through the lens of how we are treated by God. Another one from the book of John. This is another one you guys have heard a lot, but nevertheless, examine it through this new lens that I'm positing. John 13:34, a new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another as I have loved you, and that ye also love one another. Do you hear what he did there? He said, love one another as I have also loved you, but also love one another. 35, by this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye love one to another. Now this all means that you're going to be recognized by how you love one another, by you using the same love with which you are loved. And this is all to say that I think before anything else, they say on an airplane, when the oxygen masks come down, the rule is to affix the oxygen mask to your own face before helping even your children, okay? Because the psychology there is that, you're no good to anybody if you can't get your own mask on. Like, save yourself before you save others. It's a weird thing. Now, I'm not saying that that's the philosophy with which you should live your life, but from a spiritual sense, if you are trying to teach other people something, or if you are trying to minister to other people something, you're trying to do the work of God, and you don't have a good relationship with God, I would submit that you may be doing more harm than good in many circumstances. Not in all circumstances, but that's just an idea I wanted to share with you. Let me. I wanted to read you something before I end. I told you I wasn't going to speak too long, but I wanted to read you this. You are called. Let me get on the mic. You are called to exercise spiritual disciplines. These are prayer, fasting, study, meditation, service, solitude, and silence. And there are many of these disciplines. And there are many of these disciplines. If you will incorporate them into your life, even if it's just for a few moments each day, there will come to you a deeper sense of wisdom and understanding of the way the Lord works in your life. He wants to lead you, but he does not take your agency away. When you choose to surrender to him, then you have made the right choice. That passage is one paragraph out of my patriarchal blessing, which I broke out a while ago after I hadn't really reviewed it, but it was actually at the Geneseo reunion. I saw like a whole bunch of youngsters who were going up, taking a patriarchal blessing class, and I was like, I haven't broken out my patriarchal blessing in a while. And I broke it out and I read that, and it was very, it's amazing how those really apply to different stages of your life, because I pulled it out, I was like, did he write this yesterday and leave this in the same envelope that I put in here 10 years ago? But I just wanted to share that with you, and my point is today, as we work to build the church up and establish the kingdom of God here on earth, we should first and foremost look into our own hearts and perfect our own walk on the path of righteousness. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Probably till the day I die, I won't forget the meeting we had with George Knotts and Jim and Joe. Joe was sitting there. He looked like he wasn't breathing. And George Knotts had a way of boiling everything down with humor. I won't say what he said. Do you remember what he said? Yeah. Outside of that realm, it probably would have been inappropriate. Yes. Inside that realm, it may have been inappropriate. But George let the comment go. And that kind of stabilized the whole situation, and everything was boiled down to, how do you say it? More of a relaxed atmosphere. And even now, I'm like, so anyway, I appreciate George, those things that he would bring just at the moment. That one was interesting. Anyway, I appreciate, Joe, your comments, and I know with you being so shy in front of the microphone, I appreciate you helping out today. Anyway, for our offertory, wanted to read, I liked our middle hymn. I believe that was 151. And I wanted to read quickly. I haven't seen our time, but I don't want to drag it out too far. Nope, that's not it. What was the middle hymn? Let me look at my little notes. 181. 181. I want to read the middle verse of 181. And in the context of the offertory, I want to read, I guess, verses 2 and 3. My Father's house of light, my glory-circled throne, I left for earthly night, for wandering sad and lone. I left it all for thee. Hast thou left aught for me? And then verse 3, I spent long years for thee in weariness and woe, that an eternity of love thou mightest know. I spent long years for thee, hast thou spent one for me? So as we give today, let's think about the things that we have done for him and the things that he's done for us, and how we can help support the work. I'll offer a prayer, then we can pick up the offering. Our Heavenly Father, I thank you so much the way you've blessed us both spiritually and temporally. I pray, Father, that as we give this day, the money that we have would be used wisely, would be used to good effect for the cause of Zion and for the work that you called us here in this place. We thank you for the many talents and gifts that are brought to help with the work, and We praise you for the successes that we've had. I pray also for those that are out traveling this day, doing your work. Father, for all these things we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. Jacob, then Noah, I'm glad you're here today. Thank you, Kelsey, for playing. I didn't get with Kelsey before the service. Well, actually, just shortly before the service. But I thank her for her talents in playing the piano for us and bringing that ministry. Do you have an announcement? Picture Day, Orion Priesthood. Actually, we do have a couple of administrations right after the service, so try not to take too long, because a couple of those guys are involved. Anyway, I appreciate everyone being here. I hope that you'll be here Wednesday. It's a special day in the history of man. I think maybe you all know that already. It's my birthday. I'm in charge of prayer meeting. I hope that we have a good turnout and a good time meeting together. I appreciate everyone being here today. As we close now, let's turn to hymn number 163, and we'll stand together and sing that, and then we'll have a benediction by Thoric Smith. Number 163.
Dear Lord, we thank you that we could congregate together today. We are most thankful that we were able to partake of your communion, to grow close to you, to remember our covenant that we have made in baptism, to live a new way of life, to remember you, to take on your name, and we would pray that you'd help us keep this covenant and help us keep those commandments. Help us to be strong for you and not be a stumbling block for each other or others. And help us remember to point to you as a lighthouse to keep us steady and strong through all the dark times that may come. Please be with us in the week to come, and we pray to be your disciples. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.